Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Friday Business Intelligence Tip of the Week. We're going to be taking a little bit of a break from our uh, usual Friday sessions today on Power BI, and we're going to be talking about SQL Server Agent Jobs and how is it that you raise an error from a command shell program in SQL Server Agent. So we had a number of little programs that we are running and scheduling inside SQL Server Agent. And there were occasions where we wanted to trigger an error to the agent job so that it would stop. Now, if we just did that inside our program, the SQL Server Agent would continue on like everything was hunky-dory because according to it, everything was fine. So we struggled with that a little bit, and we found a pattern, and there's a few different ways you can do it, but we found a pattern on how we like to do it now as far as capturing those errors that are happening on SQL Agent. So I'm going to go ahead and stop that banner there and go over to our SQL Management Studio. So for the purposes of this example of showing you, we're just going to create a very basic job here. So I'll say a new job and call it, something, trigger error, I'll call it. That'll work. And then for the steps, what we're going to do on this step, there's different ways that you can run it, but what the method that we've been using is through Transact SQL. And so in this step, I'm going to just say run command, and then I'm going to paste in, I save myself some typing, and I'm going to go through it with you after I paste it in here, what we do. And so what it is that we do is we first declare two variables, one to house our command that we're running and one to get the return code. We're using what's called XP command shell to execute those scripts. So what we do is we set the command that we're doing to our program. And let me make this bigger so you can see the whole thing. So we set the command to our program, which I just created a very basic .NET exe application here that I called agent command.exe. And it could be whatever you want, any executable. And I'm passing it one parameter that right now I'm throwing in a 0 in there. And then down below here, I'm saying if the return code is not equal to 0, then raise an error. And I'll go through some of the specifics of this in a minute. So the key things here is we have a program that we're running. We are going to execute that through command shell. And what command shell does is it runs that command. And if your program returns a value, it's going to put it into this return code variable that we declared up here. So we declared an integer. And what we're doing in this program is anything that we want to be a success, we return 0. Anything not a success, we return something other than 0 into the command. And that's what it's testing for here. Then it runs it, comes back with a result. We test that result. If that result is not equal to 0, we're going to raise an error to SQL Agent. And I'm going to say OK on this and say OK again. And so that created my trigger application here. So what I'm going to do as an example is we'll just run this job. And all it's doing is it's calling that command, passing it the 0. Now the 0 that I'm passing it is the return code I'm back. So all my program did was return back the argument that I was passing it. So as you can see, it's returning a success. If I come back here to my properties, and we'll change that job step again. This time, instead of a 0 in there, I'm going to pass it a 1 so that my program runs, gets a value, and just passes back the 1 to return code. So say 1. Now if I start this job again, run it, it's going to run, and hopefully it'll return an error. There it is as an error. So the key is your program returns the appropriate values back to your program. Now, if in these steps here, and I do edit on that, in these steps I wanted to return something a little bit more dynamic than that, I would expand upon this if statement that I have here and do things accordingly based on different errors that would come back. So maybe file not found, I would return a different number than something else. Now, the thing about this, I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel here, is if I do view history on the job, so those of you that are used to view history, if I go into this and I look at the job error that happened, you're going to see a generic error 50,000, the step failed. It's nothing related to the actual message that I put in there. If you want to actually get at that message, what you need to do is you need to put into SQL Server your custom messages. Now, how you do that, let me jump over here. So here, I just brought up two websites from Microsoft just as reference that I'll go through with you. The raise error command, there's a number of different options you can put in there. I'm not going to go through that. I've used the one basic raise error. But in this other one, there's an SP add message. So now by default, it's doing a 50,000 message. But if you want to add your own, you can add your own message numbers from 50,001 to 2 billion, whatever number it is that you want, and give it at different severities and messages and so forth. And so then what you do on the raise error is you raise it with, there'll be an example at the bottom here. Find my raise error with the message number that is your custom message. So first you declare your custom message like it's got here, and then you raise it with that message number. So if you do want to raise specific types of messages and put that in SQL Agent, you can do that. We typically don't do a lot of that. Instead, what we're trying to do is just stop SQL Agent, and then we have a logging mechanism that we log all the other errors in a lot more detail than we want to go to in SQL Server. So we're putting it into a database as well as some other log files. So that's where our users typically go. But in general, if you just want to, if you have a few, this add message will work for you to do that. So in general, the key thing is just get SQL Agent to stop if your program does throw an error in a command prompt. And that's really the key I wanted to show you. The key is do a return code from your program and then test for the value of that return code and then raise error. And that will get that stopped here in SQL Agent for you. Now, one thing about running those jobs, there's two common errors I see for people on running those commands. So if I do properties here, the key thing, and sometimes for security reasons, people don't necessarily like to expose XP command shell. But what you can do is in the start of this job is enable XP command shell, run the job, and then disable XP command shell. So a common error that when you go to run a program initially is it might say that XP command shell is disabled. You don't necessarily need to turn it on globally. You can enable it as part of your command, run your command, and then disable it. So it's not just sitting running open. The other common problem I see is permissions. Just know that the agent user needs to have permissions to whatever folder that it is that's running your command. If it doesn't, you will get an error. And SQL Agent, what it does is it just it runs and acts like it runs, but not there'll be an error, but not really give you any details about it. So to troubleshoot that, what I like to do is just if you copy this right out of the SQL Agent command, and I go cancel here. If I go over to a query window and I run this here, oops, gotta run it, not execute. It gives you a lot more details, and what it would show you here is access denied error. So if you see access denied, what that's saying is that you didn't have access to this program. It doesn't necessarily tell you that specifically, it just is a generic access denied, but that's a common error that I see when executing these command shell programs. And people are a little bit stumped. They're thinking that it's related to something in command shell or to the system, but it's actually your file structure where that is. So I hope you found this session interesting. Next week, we'll jump back to Power BI, but I had this question come up over the week and kill two birds with one stone. I will answer it here and share this with the rest of you. Thanks for joining, and we'll talk to you again next week.